take their seats. It being 2 p.m, questions without notice. And I call the Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. And I ask, how will the Prime Minister's industrial relations changes, which allow the wages of workers to be cut, help the economic recovery? Won't his changes just make things worse?
The Prime Minister has the call.
No, Mr Speaker. No, Mr Speaker. That's the answer to the question. The Leader of the Opposition is engaged in a desperate overreach. That's what he's engaged in, Mr Speaker. I'll tell you what our plans are doing. They're putting people back into work, Mr Speaker. Whether it's the plans that we want to put in place to make sensible changes that actually helps businesses employ people, Mr Speaker, whether it's changes that are actually building the skills of the Australian workforce, whether it's the revitalisation of the Australian manufacturing industry, which is the technology roadmap, Mr Speaker, some $18 billion invested over the next decade that will transform the global economy, working with other partners around the world, Mr Speaker. All of these things, reducing the cost to households by reducing their tax burden, not just for individuals, Mr Speaker, but also for businesses going out there taking risks to put Australians back into work. Cutting red tape, Mr Speaker, seeing the transformation of the digital economy in Australia. So critical, Mr Speaker, the instant expensing.
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
Yeah, on direct relevance, Mr Speaker. The question is already broad. It refers to the industrial relations changes. I'm not surprised that the Prime Minister doesn't want to refer to the industrial relations changes, but he has to be relevant.
Just say, I take the point the Manager of Opposition Business is trying to make. The question was about industrial relations, but it also, I think, broadened the scope for the answer with the words, won't they make things worse? And I think the Prime Minister's entitled to talk about the government's approach on workplace and jobs and what the government's priorities are. So I think he's in order so far.
When you give them a one-word answer, they don't like it, and when you give them an expansive answer, they don't like it either. The answer, Mr Speaker, is what the Australian people are seeing from this government on the economy, which is putting people back into jobs, Mr Speaker. The only job those opposite are focused on at the moment, Mr Speaker, is the job of that man right there.
The member for Curtin.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister update the House on the importance of the Australia-US relationship and how the further deepening of our alliance will provide greater certainty and stability in the region and aid in our continued recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for her question. This was a very warm and engaging call that I was able to share today, Mr Speaker, with President Biden, and that is something I'm sure that all members of this House would welcome, given the importance of the Australia-US alliance. And I also thank the Leader of the Opposition for his courtesy today, which enabled me to have that call uninterrupted by the various divisions in Parliament. I thank the Leader of the Opposition. Mr Speaker,
Member for Bruce.
The relationship we spoke of today, that both the President and I steward, as Prime Ministers and Presidents have done, particularly over these last 70 years of the ANZUS relationship from all sides of politics, Mr Speaker, is one that the President described as the anchor for peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific, both now and into the future, and that is very true. And today we were able to once again affirm our commitment to that all-important alliance, not just for Australia's security, not just for the peace in the region, Mr Speaker, all of this so essential, but the ongoing prosperity of our peoples, both here and in the United States. We affirmed our commitment to the many ways we work that relationship, whether it be defence and security or intelligence, but particularly through our multilateral engagements, whether it be through the Quad, whether it be through the Five Eyes relationship, whether it be indeed through the G7+ dialogue that is becoming larger, Mr Speaker, or in the many other forums in which we engage, working together on the COVID response, on the economic recovery in both countries and around the world, global and regional security here amongst our ASEAN partners, Mr Speaker, and the Pacific nations of our region, with whom I engaged with yesterday, Mr Speaker, and the day before. the multilateral institutions and the reforms, whether it's the World Trade Organisation or so many other places, working together as liberal market democracies to advance our shared worldview as to how the world will recover from this pandemic. And achieving a net zero technology pathway, Mr Speaker, is what we discussed, understanding that technology was the way to achieve this and the many partnerships we can engage in together to advance, Mr Speaker, that technology agenda that will be transformational. The overlap between the Biden administration's technology outlook when it comes to reducing emissions and doing so in a way that preserves jobs is shared by this government, Mr Speaker, and it overlaps. And that's what was said during the campaign, and it is now what we're realising, and I look forward to doing this. But ultimately, Mr Speaker, Australia's relationship with the United States is a sovereign one, and it's one that looks to the United States, definitely, but it's never one that leaves it to the United States. Our relationship with the United States is one of an equal partnership, of shared views, Mr Speaker, and one that has had a profound positive influence on the peace and stability and prosperity of our region.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, Mr Speaker, just briefly on indulgence, on behalf of this side of the House, we very much welcome the election of President Biden and his administration, and we look forward to a strengthening of the relationship between our two great democracies.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is addressed to the Prime Minister, and I ask, how can the Prime Minister claim his industrial relations changes don't allow for cuts when the cuts are right here in Schedule 3, Part 5, Clause 19 of the Prime Minister's own industrial relations legislation that is before this parliament right now?
The Minister for Industrial Relations.
They're simply not. And that provision doesn't do what the Leader of the Opposition is saying before the House that it does do. And, Mr Speaker, being asked by the opposition a form of question which falsely puts something that the bill does, it's useful to look at the things that the bill actually does and which are all opposed by members opposite. The bill imposed...
Minister will resume his seat. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Yes, Mr Speaker. There have been a number of questions here this week, as you recall, Mr Speaker. Here we have clarified Schedule 3, Part 5, Clause 19. We are down to the paragraph in the legislation that this question is about.
You need to state what the point of order is. I'm assuming
it's on relevance. The minister can't talk about every other clause. He has to talk about this clause, which is the better off overall test.
Yes, I would like to rule on the point of order. Unlike the last question, there's not any tolerance in this. The minister has been asked about a specific clause, and he needs to confine himself to that. I mean, obviously, as he started the answer, he dealt with the matter very directly. But the Leader of the Opposition's right. It's not about any other clauses, and doesn't enable him to do that. The minister has the call.
Well, I can reiterate, Mr Speaker, that what the Leader of the Opposition contends could occur in that clause cannot occur, will not occur, and does not occur now with precisely the same drafted protections that Labor put into the Act.
Members on my left, when we've had a specific question, the Leader of the Opposition's raised a point of order. I've asked the minister to answer the question directly. A wall of noise is just going to result in a whole series of ejections from the chamber. The member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer update the House on how the Morrison government's strong economic management is ensuring our economy is not only recovering but is now gathering pace?
The Treasurer has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Lindsay for her question and acknowledge her experience working in the not-for-profit sector before coming to this place, and for working with those on this side of the House to deliver tax cuts to more than 80,000 taxpayers in the electorate of Lindsay, Mr Speaker. Now, Mr Speaker, yesterday the Governor of the Reserve Bank of Australia gave a very significant speech at the Press Club, and he said that the economic recovery was happening earlier and stronger than first forecast. and he talked about the strength in the housing market. He talked about the strong rebound in retail sales. He talked about strong employment growth, and he said that the Reserve Bank's forecasts have been updated so that they now expect GDP to be back at its pre-COVID levels by mid this year, 6 to 12 months earlier than first forecast. In fact, their forecasts today are much better than their most optimistic scenarios in August of last year. Now, this comes after other important economic data. 90% of the 1.3 million Australians who either lost their jobs or saw their working hours reduced to zero at the start of the pandemic are now back at work. We saw quarterly growth in the September at its highest level since 1976, Mr Speaker, and we have seen consumer confidence and business confidence get back to its pre-pandemic levels. This week we saw consumer confidence go up earlier this week, 16 out of 20 weeks, and today I can report to the House that business confidence is up by 22 points, Mr Speaker. 22 points, and that the capital expenditure expectations of business are now the highest in a decade, Mr Speaker. Now, that is the good economic data that is showing that the economic recovery is underway. When I had the opportunity to visit the electorate of Lindsay, I met with many businesses that had graduated off JobKeeper. More than 2 million Australian workers and 450,000 businesses have graduated under JobKeeper, out of JobKeeper as the economic recovery is underway. So while some in this place might want to talk down the economic recovery, some in this place might want to talk down JobKeeper and the significance of it, the fact is it has helped build a bridge to the other side of this crisis now, Mr Speaker. Now, there is a long way to go. But as the Governor said yesterday, you wouldn't want to be in any other country but Australia because we are very well placed on both the health and the economic front. And that has been due to the work of 25 million Australians and the unprecedented economic support from the Morrison government. So, Mr Speaker, this government, under this Prime Minister, is focused on delivering more jobs, and that is exactly what we are seeing in the Australian economy.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister, and I again refer to his industrial relations legislation, and in particular Schedule 3, Part 5, Clause 19. If the Prime Minister suspends the Better Off Overall test, doesn't that mean that workers don't have to be better off overall?
The Minister for Industrial Relations.
It's complex for the Leader of the Opposition. Let me read for all members of the House what Clause 19 actually says in black and white. After FWC may brackets first occurring, close brackets, insert also. Wow. I mean, he cannot even get the right clause.
The Minister resume his seat. Members on both sides will cease interjecting. Members on both sides will cease interjecting. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Yes, Mr Speaker. The Minister is misleading the House.
No, I just say to the
Section 19.
No, you need to state the point of order.
Substantial. He can't just stand there and just make things up, Mr Speaker.
The Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. The Treasurer will cease interjecting. We'll get to your member for Clark. I won't forget. The Leader of the Opposition has asked a question. How the Minister answers it, I need to ensure they're relevant to the question, but I can't vet all statements for accuracy. In fact, I don't have a role in that. I just simply need to make sure he's being relevant to the question, and I think he was being relevant to the question. The Leader of the Opposition on a further point of order.
Order with regard to relevance, and it goes to this.
But you just had a point of order.
No, it wasn't on relevance.
Well, what was it on?
It was on accuracy.
Well, there isn't one.
You've now said
No.
I can do it on relevance.
No. Members on my right, I'm not. I showed great leniency in assuming it was on relevance. There is no point of order on accuracy in answers. I didn't rule it out of order. I took it as a point of order on relevance. I will hear the member for Goldstein. I'll hear from the Leader of the Opposition,
Mr. Speaker.
without interruption.
In order to be relevant, the minister has to refer to the clause which is in the question that says the Fair Work Commission may approve the agreement under this section if the agreement is not a Greenfields agreement and the FWC has satisfied that A, it is appropriate to do so, taking into account all of the circumstances including, and then there is 4 separate sections and then a Part B to that section. He has to refer to that because that is what I quoted in the question, not whatever it is that he's going on about, in order to make a point and avoid the substance of the cuts by the suspension of the Better Off Overall test.
Will resume his seat. The minister has the call. Thank you.
No, I do see what the member is getting at. There are 2 clauses that work in tandem. Those words that he just read are there.
Minister will pause for a second. Members will cease interjecting. And I want to make it very clear, I'm now issuing a general warning. With everyone listening, if you are ejected for interjecting, don't be surprised. The minister has the call.
The provisions would amend section 189 of the Fair Work Act, which was put into that Act by members opposite, which has a protection around the Boot test, which says that any decision of the Fair Work Commission could not be contrary to the public interest. And those words that you put into the Act are precisely replicated. Indeed, were just read out by the Leader of the Opposition, the same protections precisely replicated by the words that would be inserted by this government in this bill.
The members on my left. Member for Clark.
Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, I'm aware of allegations that TT Line, a Tasmanian government business, is ripping off consumers by not passing on the federal government's $6 million temporary increase to the Bass Strait Passenger Vehicle Equalisation Scheme, known as the Bring Your Car for Free promotion. Yes, vehicle charges have dropped, but at the same time it seems TT Line is jacking up passenger and cabin fares so it can cost more to sail with a car than it did before the promotion. This would be state-sanctioned misuse of federal funding, a rip-off and another blow to the Tasmanian economy and tourism sector. Prime Minister, will you do something about this? Will you investigate the matter urgently?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. The pandemic, as he and I both know, severely impacted the number of people travelling across Bass Strait to Tasmania, and at one point 85% of passenger travel on the Spirit of Tasmania was cancelled. Now, as a result of that, the Deputy Prime Minister, in working with the coalition Tasmanian MPs and senators, but senators in particular, the members for Braddon and Bass, and I commend them for the great work that they've done here, as well as the Tasmanian Premier and his government and the Tasmanian tourism sector, announced further support through the Bass Strait Passenger Vehicle Equalisation Scheme. We did that on the 7th of January this year to encourage more Australians to travel to Tasmania. Now, this support consisted of $6 million to increase the rebate and make it free to take a car or a motorbike across the Bass Strait, a saving of $240 for return passengers. And the rebate was to apply to a new booking for travel from March 1 until 30 June or until funding was exhausted. And I'm advised that when travellers book their ticket, the rebate automatically applies to the purchase price of the ticket. And I'll ask the Deputy Prime Minister to add further to the answer.
The Deputy Prime Minister.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Prime Minister, and thank you to the member for Clark. And if member for Clark, if you have any specific allegations in relation to this and that you would like to be investigated, I'd be very, very happy to look at them. On January 7, I announced, well, I'm happy to see members in my office, and I do that all the time, member for Corio, all the time, yours, ours, to get things done. That's what the parliament's for. You may not know that. But on January 7, I announced the full subsidisation of the cost, as the Prime Minister said, of transporting a standard car or bus across Bass Strait under the existing Bass Strait Passenger Vehicle Equalisation Scheme, which has been successfully operating since 1996. COVID-19, of course, has significantly affected tourism in Tasmania and the number of passenger vehicles travelling across Bass Strait, which is why we've committed $6 million to bring more travellers to Tasmania, providing the kickstart to 2021 that Tasmania so desperately needs. And I met with Premier Peter Gutwein whilst I was in Tasmania the other day, and of course I had representations from the members for Bass and Braddon and our senators as well in the other place, who very much advocated for this. Tourists who arrive on the Spirit of Tasmania, they stay longer, they spend more, and they disperse further throughout Tasmania's regions. And I know you would appreciate that as much as any member in this place. And while sea arrivals account for only 12% of all visitors to Tasmania, they contribute 20% of all annual visitor spend. But I say again, if you've got any specific allegations, I'd like to hear them.
The member for Mallee.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. Will the Deputy Prime Minister inform the House how the Morrison-McCormack government's continued investment in regional infrastructure is creating stability and a stronger Australia as we recover from the COVID-19 pandemic?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I do thank the member for Mallee for her question. And she, like every member on this side of the House, and one in particular on that side of the House, knows full well the importance of the rollout of infrastructure in creating jobs, and more on that little thing later. As part of the government's 110... I'll keep you in suspense. As part of the government's $110 billion infrastructure pipeline, that is supporting 100,000 jobs. Now, in the members' electorate of Mallee and in Wannon, we have invested an additional $200.2 million to undertake the next stage on the upgrade and standardisation of the Murray Basin Freight Rail Network. This project will see the standardisation of the railway line between Mildura and Geelong, two very vibrant places. We want to be even better. And the member for Corio agrees with me now. This additional funding would not have happened without the fierce advocacy for this project from the member for Mallee and the member for Wannon. The remediation works will create significant economic activity along the line, supporting local businesses, local procurement, so important, and creating 1,000 additional jobs. Now, these types of jobs in regional Australia have a significant flow-on right throughout the local economies, and that's what we're doing with every part and portion of our rollout of infrastructure over the next decade. That's what we are providing. Now, the extra funding, which includes $5 million for planning the next stages to fully standardise the Murray Basin network, $5 million for planning, and that's going to be critical too. And I absolutely call on the Victorian government to join us in the completion of this vital project. It is crucial that a reliable rail network is available to efficiently move this grain, and the member for Mallee knows just how diverse what is being and what is going to be transported. Grain, as I say, mineral sands, fruit and vegetables, wine, to encourage more of that freight off the road network and onto the rail network. But, Mr. Speaker, you do get some support from different quarters and some allies when you are talking infrastructure from places and people that you would not expect. And certainly it was the case when 4 days ago I saw a tweet from none other than the Shadow Minister for Infrastructure supporting what we are doing as part of rail in Victoria. When Wendouree Station now has a second platform, all part of Victoria's regional rail revival. New infrastructure, she declared, for regional communities. And here's the punchline: great to see. It is great to see, member for Ballarat. It is fantastic. And I'm getting a clap from the member for Sydney. She loves the Victorian rail upgrades too. $503 million of which, of the 601 for the Ballarat upgrade, is coming from the Liberal and Nationals government. And I know all members opposite
The Deputy Prime Minister's time has concluded. The Manager of Opposition Business has the call.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Attorney-General and Minister for Industrial Relations, and I refer to his previous answer where he said the words in the amending bill and the Act were precisely the same. Does the Attorney-General realise if the words were exactly the same, it wouldn't be an amendment? Why is the government trying to use the pandemic as cover for a pay cut without being upfront with the Australian people? The government is suspending the Better Off Overall test. That allows workers to be worse off.
The Minister for Industrial Relations.
But the words are exactly the same, Mr Speaker. The words would not be contrary to the public interest, which is the singular, purposeful test and safeguard are precisely the same. So that provision, section 189, which members opposite inserted into the Fair Work Act, which in emergency situations allows—
The Minister will resume his seat. The Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting. I'm not going to hear from the Manager of Opposition Business yet because the Minister is not even 30 seconds into his answer, but I'm listening to the Minister very carefully. The Minister has the call.
So the point of the members opposite, Mr Speaker, seems to be this, that in the Fair Work Act there is an existing section, section 189. It is headed, "The Fair Work Commission may approve an enterprise agreement that does not pass the boot." It's to be used in emergency circumstances. It was put in the Fair Work Act by members opposite. Their killer point is that in our bill we're maintaining it and maintaining the protection for the purposes of an emergency such as COVID, that no agreement could be approved by the Fair Work Commission if it was not contrary to the public interest. They have to make a decision, the Fair Work Commission, that any change is in the public interest. If the change is contrary to the public interest, it would never be approved. That's the test that you put in, that's the test that we support, and in the circumstances of COVID we think that's a sensible test.
The member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. Will the Minister please update the House on Australia's vaccine rollout and what the Morrison government is doing to protect Australian lives and livelihoods and create a stronger Australia?
The Minister for Health.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Boothby, in particular for her advocacy for a national stillbirth action plan, along with members from right across both chambers, but also I would acknowledge the member for McMahon. So many people contributing to an extremely important outcome to save lives. Saving lives, of course, is what our COVID response has been about in Australia. All of the work being brought together by so many people across not just the chambers, but across the country. Today, we've seen one community case. Around the world, 439,000 cases. Today, fortunately, we've seen no lives lost, as was the case right throughout January. Sadly, almost 14,000 lives lost around the world and over 400,000 lost around the world in January. So against that background of a pandemic which is wreaking enormous damage, the vaccine becomes critical globally and in Australia. And shortly before question time, I was delighted to join the Prime Minister along with Professor Brendan Murphy, the head of the Scientific and Industry Technical Advisory Group on Vaccines, to announce that Australia had purchased an additional 10 million doses of the Pfizer mRNA vaccine. That was built into the contract, the option of additional doses, when we prepared it and developed it. The advice which we have followed throughout on vaccine purchasing came from Professor Brendan Murphy's team, with Professor Paul Kelly, the Chief Medical Officer, Professor Alan Cheng, the Deputy Chief Health Officer in Victoria, and many other distinguished leaders in Australia. We exercised that option once the approval was given by the TGA, as was always the plan. And so throughout this we have been working to a plan on containment and capacity, and within the capacity element working on the vaccines strategy. That strategy has seen us acquire now 150 million doses, three times that needed to vaccinate the whole of the population with 2 shots on each occasion. That is now 20 million Pfizer doses, 53.8 million Oxford AstraZeneca doses, 51 million Novavax and 25.5 million through the COVAX facility. Significantly, we have followed that advice, and it's very important that we continue to do that based on the best expert medical recommendations to the government. We'll continue to do that. The advice I also have today, both from Pfizer and from AstraZeneca, is that we remain on track for the rollout commencing in late February and early March, respectively, and this will help save lives and protect lives.
The member for Cooper.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. First, the government pretended its industrial relations changes did not allow for pay cuts. Then it briefed the media that the part of the legislation that suspends the Better Off Overall test would be dropped. Now it's back to denying the cuts exist. So rather than denying the truth, why doesn't this government either defend the pay cut or drop it?
The Minister for Industrial Relations.
Well, Mr Speaker, there is no such thing. Well, they laugh as if they've been very convincing today. And they haven't been at all convincing, because you can't convince people of things that are not correct. What I can do, Mr Speaker, is talk about what the bill does do, and it is a bill designed not to ensure that people have less, rather that people have more. Everything in this bill is designed to ensure that people have more money, more wages and better conditions. And let's have a look. The Labor Party have made a decision, and that's inside their ambit, to oppose the bill in its entirety. What does that mean that Labor are opposing? Labor are now opposing tougher civil penalties to stamp out wage theft. So if you are a worker who has been the subject of underpayment, you are supposed to believe that the Labor members are on your side, except that they are opposing tougher civil penalties to stamp out wage theft. Labor are opposing the third institution. Labor are opposing the institution of the first ever Commonwealth criminal penalty for wage theft. That's what their position on this bill is. Labor will oppose creating a new small claims stream for the recovery of wage payments.
The Minister will resume his seat for a second. I haven't called you yet. I'm about to. Yeah, that's okay. The member for Cooper on a point of order.
Yes, we asked the question very specifically.
No, just on point of order.
On relevance.
On relevance,
sorry,
yeah. The member for Cooper.
We asked a very specific question about, rather than denying the truth, why doesn't the government defend the pay cut, not drop it? I didn't ask about anything else about the legislation, Mr Speaker.
But the question, if I may say so, wasn't as tight as an earlier question from the Leader of the Opposition. It did have a lot of commentary in it, and that's why it allows the Minister to range more widely. He's certainly on the topic of the piece of legislation you asked about, and so that's why he has more latitude on this occasion. The Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The bill doesn't take pay from people. It has the first ever criminal penalties to ensure that people get their money back. Yeah. And not that long ago, the member for Watson said vulnerable workers getting their money back quickly has to be the highest priority. Well, here's the bill that strengthens the civil penalties. Here's the bill that has criminal penalties for wage theft. Here's the bill that sets out a new small claims tribunal, all things that they said that they support, all things that the union movement asked for, and now all things that they're opposing. The bill, in its present form, ensures that people get paid properly, that there are proper offences if they're not paid properly. It ensures that wages will increase. It ensures that jobs will increase. It ensures, just as the member for Watson wanted, that vulnerable workers getting their money back quickly has to be the highest priority. And indeed, it was reported in the media, I believe, this morning, that the Labor Party's opposition to the entirety of the bill was just something that they were willing to do, and that they would accept there'd be some collateral damage. That was the words of a Labor member quoted to the newspaper. So if you're a worker who's been underpaid and you want the protections in this bill of tougher civil penalties, of a criminal offence against wage theft, if you want a small claims tribunal to get your money back quicker, you are now Labor Party's collateral damage in their desperate strategic move.
The Minister's time has concluded. I call the member for Barara.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is for the Minister representing the Minister for Defence. Will the Minister outline to the House how the Australia-US relationship, through our defence cooperation, is creating a stronger Australia and stability and certainty in our region?
The Minister representing the Minister for Defence.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I want to say thank you very much to the member for Berowra for his service on the Joint Committee for Intelligence and Security. He contributes an enormous amount to the security of this nation through his work on that committee, and I commend all people from both sides of the House on the work of the PJCIS. Mr Speaker, as all Australians know, the National Security Committee has met constantly over the course of the last 12 months, not just to deal with the COVID pandemic and to try and keep Australians safe, and we've made a number of decisions, including closing our borders, which has resulted in us being able to work closely with health and to deliver the best possible outcome for the Australian people. We've dealt with issues around counter-terrorism, we've dealt with issues around cyber attacks on Australian businesses and families, but we have never ever taken our eye off the ball of keeping Australians safe by making sure that we have the appropriate compacts and friendships and alliances with those nations which are most important, not just for our country, but for our region and indeed for the rest of the world. There is no more important alliance, Mr Speaker, than between our country and the United States of America. The work that we do with the United States is incredibly important. The intelligence that we receive, the intelligence that we provide to the United States and the way in which we work with our Five Eyes partners helps keep Australians safe. It's done it for generations and it will do it for generations into the future. And it's why the Prime Minister's call this morning with the President of the United States, President Biden, was so important. It underscored that relationship. Mr Biden is an exemplary friend of Australia, and the work that the Prime Minister's put into the relationship over the course of the last few years has been quite remarkable, and it has built us into a position, Mr Speaker, where we are able to provide support to troops coming into Darwin. We've even been able to do that during the course of COVID, because the way in which our troops are able to work with their American colleagues is incredibly important. And I know that Minister Reynolds had a very important and productive discussion with her counterpart, the new Secretary for Defence, Lloyd Austin, last week, and underscored what are the three key priorities for the Alliance Defence Cooperation in 2021, and they are as follows: progressing bilateral force posture initiatives to contribute to regional security, enhancing our regional activities to contribute to a region that is secure, prosperous, inclusive and rules-based. Third, deepening our defence science and technology and industry cooperation in ensuring the alliance maintains its capability edge. Mr Speaker, this is an enduring alliance that so far has lasted 7 decades, and it will continue to go from strength to strength if we do that by sharing our values and our interests and our security with the United States. We can provide the best possible opportunity to keep Australians safe.
The member for Adelaide.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. According to the government's own fair pay calculator, under the Prime Minister's industrial relations changes, a butcher working part-time, Thursday to Sunday, could lose nearly $7,000 a year from their take-home pay. Why is the Prime Minister abandoning these workers?
The Minister for Industrial Relations.
Mr Speaker, that calculator simply does not produce that result. It simply does not produce that result. I mean, that is absolutely nonsensical. What this bill does is it does a range of things with respect to underpayments to make sure that people get paid. It makes enterprise agreement making quicker and faster. Yeah. It works on ensuring that part-time permanent employees can get shifts and get paid more in circumstances where they're not presently getting shifts and being paid more. This bill provides the first consistent, strong pathway to permanent employment from being a casual, and these are all things that Labor now oppose. As it was put in in an article by Mr Philip Coury, one Labor source said that if these provisions became collateral damage, then so be it. So provisions that would ensure that people who are underpaid get protected, that's collateral damage now, is it? A small claims tribunal to ensure that people get paid properly becomes collateral damage. Changes designed to give permanent part-time employees the option to work extra shifts and earn more money if they want to. That's collateral damage now, is it? ensuring that there is a consistent, strong pathway for an employer who wants to move to permanent employment from casual employment exists. You now oppose that, and that is collateral damage. What you could have done is looked at this bill like you would look, say, for instance, at a menu at a Chinese restaurant. You could have looked at it, and you could have looked at things that you say increase the ability to get back wages where people have been underpaid, that get more employment for people who are on part-time contracts, that ensure that there are proper penalties for wage theft, that make enterprise agreements.
The Minister will just resume his seat for a second. The Deputy Manager of Opposition Business.
There was a specific instance that was raised by the member for Adelaide. The Minister is now ranging across a whole range of different areas that don't deal with this butcher situation and a $7,000 pay cut.
Yeah, I just say to the Deputy Manager of Opposition Business that the Minister certainly did briefly stray into other areas, but he's now certainly on the subject of pay, and I think he's entitled, when he's asked a question about that asserts the government's cutting pay, to be able to talk about what his policy approach is with respect to pay as it relates to the legislation. So he's.
One of the things that this legislation does is it makes enterprise agreement and bargaining in enterprise agreement simpler and faster than it exists at the moment. And why does that cause increased pay for people? Well, the average weekly earnings for people on enterprise agreements is $1,331. For those on awards, it's $789. So the more people we can get covered by enterprise agreements, the more that they will get paid. And that used to be your position. The member for Watson said the bargaining system is much harder at the moment and taking much longer than it should. Policies that get bargaining moving again are going to be really important. And, you know, I don't think that anyone says every rule that is there at the moment should remain unchanged. But what they now say with respect to bargaining is that every rule that does exist at the moment should remain unchanged. Totally reverse their position because they want to avoid what they call collateral damage. There's one piece of collateral damage that they're trying to avoid.
The Minister's time has concluded. The member for Stirling.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Defence Industry. Will the Minister outline to the House how the Morrison government's investment in our defence industry is supporting Australian jobs and ensuring a strong Australia as we come back from the COVID-19 recession?
The Minister for Defence Industry.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Stirling for his question and acknowledge and thank him for his outstanding service to our Australian Defence Force, and also thank the thousands of men and women just like him who've also put on the uniform to keep Australians safe. Mr Speaker, the Morrison government's $270 billion investment in defence capability is supporting thousands of Australian jobs right across the country, in the city and, more importantly for me personally, in the regions as well. Mr Speaker, because of the actions that we took in 2020, our defence industry is stronger than ever. Not only are we surviving, but we are thriving, and we should all be immensely proud of that. Today, Mr Speaker, our government announced that we will build a new fleet of military vehicles. These vehicles can travel on land and water under a new $800 million upgrade to Army's amphibious vehicles, or vessels, I should say, replacing those vessels that we actually used in the Vietnam War. So it's quite historic, Mr Speaker. And this project, Mr Speaker, like all defence industry projects, means more jobs for Australians, more opportunities for Australian businesses to help to deliver the capabilities for our Defence Force. Mr Speaker, also today, very proudly, together with the member for Herbert, he and I announced that Townsville is set to be the home of a new military combat training centre. This centre will train soldiers in driving, gunnery and also tactics of operating our current and future armoured fighting vehicles. Today we announced that we're going to invest $30 million to build this centre, which is the first phase, with construction to start this month actually, and the project will be completed mid-2022. Those North Queensland businesses, together with the subbies, will be able to help the managing contractor, St Hilliers, to be able to deliver this job, supporting some 110 projects. Mr Speaker, 98% of the work on this project will be sourced locally, and as you can imagine, that is music to the ears of the local Townsville tradies. This is just another great example of the Morrison government backing Australian jobs, regional businesses to help deliver essential capability for the Australian Defence Force. Mr Speaker, to make sure that we are doing everything we can to keep Australians in jobs, especially during this COVID time, our government has fast-tracked now $21 billion worth of invoices since March last year to defence suppliers. This has been extremely welcomed by the defence suppliers, who have told us categorically this has kept Australians in work, not only in the cities but in regional Australia. I think, Mr Speaker, you can see we're not slowing down, we're getting on the job, we're supporting jobs and defence industry in the bush and in the city.
Concluded, and the member for Solomon will leave under 94A, and the Deputy Leader of the Opposition has the member for Solomon. Just before you leave, this is the second occasion where you've been asked to leave under 94A for interjecting, and you've interjected again as you're leaving the chamber. That normally would result in a naming offence. Member for Solomon is on very thin ice. The member for Solomon will leave the chamber and will not behave in that way again, or he will be named, and if that motion is carried, he'll be ejected for 24 hours. And as far as his colleagues are concerned, will have wasted about 10 minutes of question time. Member for Solomon will leave immediately. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I have here an email from Andrew Burns, CEO of Hello World Travel, asking employees to accept pay cuts from the end of March when JobKeeper ends. Is this just the first round of Morrison pay cuts?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I haven't seen the correspondence to which the member refers, and I'd be happy for him to provide it to me. Mr Speaker, the JobKeeper program, as people in this place know, but more importantly as those around this country know, has been the game-changing program that has kept hundreds of thousands of Australians in work. In fact, it's saved 700,000 jobs, Mr Speaker. On top of that, Mr Speaker, as we have said from the outset, that the JobKeeper program was proportionate, it was temporary, it was targeted, Mr Speaker, to ensure that Australia came through the worst period of the pandemic. Now, we have always recognised, as we have been transitioning, Mr Speaker, the JobKeeper program from its very significant levels of uptake early in the pandemic, that we have moved towards other forms of support, in particular in terms of the travel agent sector, with the support of some 127 million, I think it is, Mr Speaker, 128 million, the Minister reminds me, of direct support to travel agents, because we understood the very specific challenges that travel agents faced. And I thank all of my colleagues who, on behalf of those jobs and those small business people in their electorates who raised those issues with me and with the Minister for Tourism at the time, now the Minister for Finance, and we crafted, Mr Speaker, a package to provide very direct support. And that has been our approach throughout this pandemic. Throughout this pandemic, to understand where the need was, to target support to that, but in a way that respected taxpayers' money, Mr Speaker, and understood that these transitions would have to occur, because you cannot run the Australian economy on taxpayers' money forever. Mr Speaker, those opposite the Labor Party during this pandemic have had an each-way bet on the pandemic response throughout the last year, Mr Speaker. With one side of their mouth, they say they're with us, and with the other side of their mouth, Mr Speaker, they seek to undermine the effort. Mr Speaker, our government has been consistent and honest with people and delivered a support, Mr Speaker, that this country has never seen, that has saved jobs, that has got Australians back into work. Some 90% of the jobs that have been lost throughout the COVID-19 recession, Mr Speaker, have returned into the Australian economy. Mr Speaker, our plans are getting people back into work. They're going to keep getting people back into work, Mr Speaker. It is a difficult time for Australians all around this country, and they know they have had our support.
And I call the member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and my question is to the Minister for Education and Youth. Will the Minister please update the House on how the Morrison government's 100,000 additional university places will help Australian school leavers get the skills and qualifications they need to get a job during the COVID-19 recovery and create a stronger Australia in 2021 and beyond?
The Minister for Education.
Well, can I thank the member for Robertson for her question and for her incredible advocacy of the University of Newcastle and particularly the Central Coast campus based just near her electorate. Mr Speaker, from this year, Australian school leavers will be able to benefit from the government's Job Ready Graduates package. Now, this is a package which is aimed at giving more opportunities for young people to do a course to then get a job. And there's many components to this particular package, Mr Speaker. First, there will be 30,000 more university places in 2021 and 100,000 additional places over the decade. Now, this is $903 million of investment to support that. But second, Mr Speaker, we've actually changed the prices of some of these courses such that people are encouraged to do the degrees and the courses which have the best shot of leading into work at the end of it. So you find, for example, that science, engineering and IT, they've gone down 18% in price this year compared to last year. Nursing has gone down 42% this year, and agriculture and maths are down 59% in price this year, Mr Speaker. All up, students who enrol this year, 60% of them will either be paying less or the same amount this year compared to what they would have done last year, Mr Speaker. And of course there's no charge up front for those students. And we've already seen the results of these price changes with early application data showing that more people are in fact enrolling in teaching and agriculture and nursing, so good results. For those regional students, which I know many are concerned about here, and those students who live some distance away from university campus, we're also making it easier for them by introducing a new $5,000 tertiary access payment to help those students get to a campus if they live more than 90 minutes away from one. Again, that's about creating opportunities for those students to be able to take up those courses. Finally, Mr Speaker, real innovation, and I commend the Minister for Trade for this package, and that is a new additional 50,000 short courses, 6-month courses, specifically for those people who may have lost their jobs last year during the pandemic, to quickly upskill, get a qualification and then be able to get back into the workforce. Mr Speaker, this is an incredible package. $1.5 billion worth of investment, 150,000 opportunities, Mr Speaker, for people in Australia, and ultimately that will lead to more jobs, which is what this government is all about creating.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is also to the Minister for Industrial Relations, and it follows the previous question from this side and refers to a letter from Hello World Management to an employee saying, calling for them to agree to a 5-figure wages cut, which says, to accept the proposed adjustment to your remuneration, please sign below and return. Is this consistent with your former Finance Minister's view that low wages growth was a deliberate feature of your economic architecture?
The Minister for Industrial Relations.
Like the Prime Minister, I've not seen that correspondence, but what I can say definitively, there is nothing in the government's Industrial Relations Reform Bill which would allow for a process such as that which has been described.
The member for Wentworth.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for the Environment. Will the Minister update the House on how the Morrison government is caring for our country by continuing to protect and enhance our natural environment, including through safeguarding our biodiversity and iconic species, and working to ensure a stronger Australia in 2021?
Great question. The Minister for the Environment.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Wentworth for his question and acknowledge the keen interest of his constituents in this important policy area. The Morrison government is committed to safeguarding Australia's unique natural landscapes. We all have a role to care for our country, be it on land or sea. Since 2014, we've supported thousands of local community projects throughout Australia, planting trees, cleaning up waterways and creeks, rebuilding after natural disasters, protecting, improving and repairing our environment. Now, when it comes to our most iconic species, Mr Speaker, people think of the koala. And I know that the koala is loved nationally and internationally. And I want to reassure the House that the recent $18 million package to support this furry marsupial is progressing well, with 60 experts meeting this week and enthusiastically helping us to design the next steps. So we will see habitat restoration, the first ever national koala census, and ways of treating koalas to keep them healthy. People are keen, caring and want to be part of this commitment. Mr Speaker, recently I was in Tasmania with a member for Bass, meeting with her land managers and natural resource management groups about the eastern barred bandicoot. And this is a perfect coming together of farmers and conservationists. And again, it's a $1.7 million investment, but it's simple, practical actions that can make a difference. We learned how to, farmers were learning how to mow grass differently, make hay differently so that they don't run over this small marsupial. 1 year on from the Black Summer bushfires, our $200 million investment in habitat and wildlife recovery is seeing results. As areas recover, volunteers they're out there, they're on the hands and knees, pulling out weeds, helping build barriers against feral pests, putting up nest boxes, collecting seeds, playing the role of citizen scientists by tracking where plants are growing and where animals are coming back. Over 1 million hectares of feral animal control has been undertaken, 7,000 hectares of weed control and over 700 hectares of erosion control has been completed. And I want to thank all those community groups out there caring for our country. Mr Speaker, our strong track record of coalition governments also includes protection of our oceans, cleaning up discarded fishing nets, those walls of death and the bycatch that suffers. The work we're doing with the Great Barrier Reef, $1.9 billion of investment, the real outcomes when it comes to taking plastic litter out of our oceans, cleaning up our beaches and making sure that communities are involved as they want to be. Be it on land or sea, we're taking practical.
The Manager of Opposition Business.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Industrial Relations, and I refer to his earlier answer where, in referring to the bill before the Parliament, he said, and I quote, "It ensures that wages will increase." Which clause does that?
The Minister has the call.
Well, a variety of clauses ensure changed circumstances that will lead to greater job growth and greater wage growth. OK, well, let's go through. So if you have penalties to stamp out wage theft, people are going to get more money because they get their wages back. If they have a small claims tribunal to get their wages back, they have more money because they get their wages back. If we encourage enterprise bargaining and enterprise agreements, where people on average get paid much more than they do in awards, and we move people from awards to enterprise agreements, then they get paid more money. If you are a part-time worker at the moment who is not being given extra shifts because the employer can't do that under the current prescriptive arrangements in your award, and you get extra shifts, guess what? Your wages go up. So you can go through a whole range of provisions in this bill, and what you will see is that they are designed to increase job growth, increase wage growth, ensure people actually get remunerated according to the terms of their agreements and have a proper mechanism of recourse if that doesn't happen. And all of these things that ensure that people have better conditions and better wages, you now oppose. You now oppose provisions that for the first ever time ensure a consistent, strong pathway from casual employment to permanent employment. How many times have members of this House and outside heard about members opposite bemoaning casualisation, and they are finally presented with the firm, consistent pathway for a casual employee to become a permanent employee? And what is their answer to that? Their answer to that is to consider it collateral damage in some global strategic move that they've got on to propose entirely a bill with clauses that help casual employees, that help permanent part-time employees, but somehow they think global opposition will help the one job they're trying to save, which is that of the Leader of the Opposition.
The member for Reid.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship, Migrant Services and Multicultural Affairs. Minister, today the Scanlon Foundation Research Institute's 2020 Mapping Social Cohesion report was published. Will the Minister please update the House on the Morrison government's response to this report and how our government's policies are geared towards creating a stronger Australia?
The Minister for Immigration.
Thank you, Speaker, and I want to thank the
If the Minister can just wait for a second while broadcasting, switch his microphone on. I'll just call the Minister again. The Minister has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. I want to thank the member for Reid for her very important question, especially considering she represents a very successful multicultural community in the inner west of Sydney, including some 20,000 Australian-born Chinese-born Australians in her community. She does a great job in government advocating for them. Today the government welcomes the Scanlon Foundation report, a very comprehensive and impressive report which updates us regularly about how we are going as a society. The report this year shows us that Australians, in some of the most difficult circumstances we've seen in a generation, are more united and more optimistic about how our society is going and our future. And Mr Speaker, this is important because we've seen societies across the globe challenged this year, and as the Prime Minister said at the very beginning of this pandemic, great upheaval, great things will be confronted, and many challenges will have to be faced. But what's pleasing about the results we see in today's report is that we have increased trust in one another as Australians, and we've seen people come together, which has been a priority for the Morrison government, keeping people together. The report shows strong support for Australian multiculturalism, 84%, up 4% from last year's report. And 71% of Australians now believe immigration makes us stronger, but 83% agree that immigration is good for the Australian economy. I'm sure all members of the House would agree with me that these are fantastic results for Australia during a very difficult year. In spite of the pandemic, of course, we've seen increased economic well-being amongst Australians as well. And this is in response to the government's comprehensive economic package that we've seen during the pandemic, JobKeeper, JobMaker, and certainly 73% of respondents, in spite of the many challenges that Australians have been through in terms of their jobs and economic circumstances, have reported that they feel satisfied or very satisfied with their financial situation. It's important that we've all stayed together. This year, of course, what's important out of this report is that we keep staying together. And the Morrison government will be speaking again about social cohesion as a priority this year. Our policies are designed to keep us all together, and I think if you look at these results, you can see that when we've been through the bushfires, we've been through the pandemic, Australians have actually come together in a way that we should all be celebrating. This year, when you look ahead and you see that we still have many challenges to face, I know all members here will look at the Scanlon report carefully. We'll take the good out of this. We'll recognise our society is better placed than everyone else because of the attitudes of ordinary Australians. We want to thank all those Australians who've helped each other this year, who've looked after their neighbours, who've looked after their mates, who've ignored the negative commentary that we do see around the globe and the divisions that we've seen, but focused on what makes us Australian, those Australian values of looking after each other.
The member for Eden Monaro.
Question is to the Prime Minister. Labor has used the government's own fair pay calculator to show how the Prime Minister's industrial relation changes will hurt cooks, pharmacy assistants, shelf stackers, aged care workers, disability carers, car park attendants, hairdressers and butchers. Why won't the Prime Minister tell the truth and admit he is changing the law to allow wages to be cut?
The Minister for Industrial Relations.
Well, because the government is not doing that. See, the thing about calculators is they don't measure the honesty of the user. Right?
Members
so the way that calculators work is they don't measure the honesty of the user. So a user can sit there and pretend certain things exist or certain conditions exist or assert a change in a bill that isn't there, or pretend that something's going to happen that clearly isn't going to happen. They can pump that into the calculator and get a result that they want and bring it into Parliament. The bill clearly does not do what the members opposite say it does. A person on an award, if they're part-time, they will benefit very greatly from this bill because they will be able, in instances where they now can't get extra work, to get that extra work and be paid more. The bill is designed and achieves the effect of more job growth, better wages, better conditions. It doesn't do what you're saying, and the honesty of those inputs into the calculator is clearly wanting.
The member for Lyne.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Regional Health, Regional Communications and Local Government. Could the Minister outline the steps that the Morrison-McCormack government is doing to ensure the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccines and how this rollout will make Australia a stronger nation?
The Minister for Regional Health.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I'd like to acknowledge the member for Lyne and recognise his long career as a medical professional looking after regional Australia. Mr Speaker, the first thing we need to acknowledge with the vaccine rollout in Australia is that it is safe. The scrutiny that the vaccines have gone through to gain approval in Australia through the TGA are second to none anywhere in the world. The second thing is that everywhere in Australia will be covered, regardless of whether you live in a regional centre or a more isolated community. Everyone will have access to the vaccine. It will be done in an orderly manner and with different demographics prioritised. And many members might have been aware a few days ago when the state governments announced their hubs for the storage of the Pfizer vaccine across the country. They are merely storage and distribution hubs. When that vaccine is thawed, it is distributed right across the network. So the priority will be health workers, frontline health workers, and then through another arrangement that the Commonwealth has with the logistics and delivery company, the other priority will be aged care, residents and the aged care workers, along with the disability sector. And then as production ramps up, and we are indeed in a privileged situation in this country where we will be manufacturing our own vaccine, then it will be rolled across the rest of Australia. And like we've been relying on the health networks across Australia for the last 12 months to keep the government informed and their community supported through the coronavirus pandemic, we will be going to GPs, community pharmacy, the local primary health networks, state government health networks, Aboriginal controlled health networks, and in some cases, in the smaller the communities, it will involve maybe flying squads coming in to set up clinics to deliver it in those areas. And so to enable that to happen, the government is already training surge workforce so they can go out into these areas, and over the next weeks and months, the entire population will be covered. And the people that will be doing this are the same people that have kept us safe for the last 12 months. Regional Australia is possibly the safest place in the world to have been in the last 12 months because of the health professionals, the nurses, the doctors, the pharmacists and others that have looked after us. But Mr Speaker, those of us here have a role to play too. We need to make sure that this rollout happens smoothly. If there's any issues come up, please contact me.
The member for McEwen.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister, and I hope that he'll answer one. According to the government's own fair pay calculator, and under the Prime Minister's industrial relations changes, hairdressers working part-time Thursday to Saturday could lose more than $3,000 a year from their take-home pay. Why is the Prime Minister punishing Australians who are just trying to get ahead by allowing cuts to their take-home pay?
Just before I call the Prime Minister, I say to all members, particularly the member for McEwen, obviously, that any commentary about that was included in that question with respect to the Prime Minister answering the question, if that occurs again, the question will not go ahead. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, because I'm not.
The member for Sturt.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. Will the minister outline how the Morrison government's new national agreement on closing the gap changes how the government works with Indigenous Australians now and into the future, and how this will help to build a stronger nation?
The Minister for Indigenous Australians.
Can I thank the member for Sturt for his contribution in this parliament, but his interest in Indigenous matters. The Closing the Gap strategy is something that both sides of this chamber have had a significant role in the various positions that we've held within this place. But what's different is the Prime Minister and I had a discussion, and what we said is we want to have the peak organisation sit and negotiate the new agreement. 51 peak Aboriginal organisations sat with state officials, ministers for Aboriginal Affairs and the Commonwealth and negotiated each target. Each target was negotiated on the basis of what is the best outcome that we will get and achieve in closing the gap in so many areas. These reforms will embed joint decision-making, building the capacity of Aboriginal community-controlled health organisations. We're focusing on transforming mainstream government agencies and, in addition, developing data and using data to make informed decisions at the local level. Now, this year, for the first time, every state and territory government, through a process in which the Ministers for Indigenous Affairs agreed, National Cabinet agreed, and state and territory cabinets also endorsed, was that each of their jurisdictions would report on the targets for closing the gap in each of their parliaments. We've never done that before. It has been the Commonwealth only that has reported. This is a substantial shift because those four embedded reforms now form the basis for which the way in which state and territory governments will work with Aboriginal people at the local level, at the jurisdictional level. The Commonwealth will remain committed to ensuring that we achieve a process, because we know that when Indigenous people are involved, we see better outcomes. We see participatory decision-making. It's a quantum shift from where we were. And I acknowledge that Kevin Rudd started the process of closing the gap. What we've done, and the Prime Minister made reference to it in his speech at the National Press Club, was our continued commitment to ensuring we embed this. So it doesn't matter who is in government, we continue the practice of involving Indigenous Australians. By doing that, we've got a better chance. Now, having 51 peak Aboriginal organisations negotiate every target with the layers of government was interesting. But it was also a power of strength at the end when we all sat together and endorsed the agreement, because there was common commitment from everybody that we would work together to achieve better outcomes.
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
I thank the